If you have been subscribed to my channel, certainly October, maybe September of last year, one of the big things I was worried about was that we would slowly, potentially even slip or heading in the direction of a recession. And that's a possibility. I still think that could happen. There's still a lot of experts saying, we are tiptoeing, very ever so slowly, potentially into a recession. That is entirely possible. But you've got to look at the British economy. And we said it. We set out the case very, very clearly. In 2016, the Remain campaign went, look, if we leave the European Union, this separates us from the big European market. Because let's say there is a recession. The thing is, it's spread about across all the countries. So there's still going to be people buying in those different countries so that British businesses can still, get on and sell into different countries. It's not, it's not the end of the world. But what did we say? The big problem would be that the UK is on its own. And when it's on its own, it means once it's out there, it cannot potentially weather some of these shocks as well as it could have. And what have we seen? We've seen the pandemic, the war in Ukraine. We've got the energy crisis at the moment, the cost of living crisis. All these different things are hitting the economy, and Brexit is making these problems worse. Infinitely. As we always said, the big problem with Brexit, it was like putting a brick or a foot on the accelerator. And the problem is, you don't know. Once you start doing that, you don't know when you're going to be able to stop, or maybe even, try, take your foot off the pedal, because that could have other consequences. And we've seen those other consequences. We've talked about those other consequences. And yet, here you've got the BBC today putting forward, look, thousands of firms are facing collapse. And you've got an interview from a insolvency company saying their calls for people going into insolvency have gone up by 36%. And yet, we have, according to the Conservatives and some MPs, the Conservatives are the party of business. This is meant to be the party that will stand up to, stand up for British business. But the Conservative Party isn't doing anything to help businesses. Sure, they helped people out in companies during the pandemic, but that was only because I think they had to. We always said when those pandemic times, the government was pretty much forced to do all the stuff they did during COVID. And that's why you had a lot of Conservatives freaking out to the point where some of them were going, what are you doing, Boris and Rishi? What are you doing? You're proving that socialism works. And you're like, okay, we'll take that, But it always worried me about the stories you would hear about business during this time, especially after as well. Because a lot of businesses went into COVID hoping that obviously the government would support and that after, things would get better. Now, of course, things may or may not be getting better. We've got high inflation, which is certainly causing a lot of problems. Like, that is a given. And it is certainly higher than any other country because of Brexit, because of the supply chain issues that it's causing, because, you've got companies that can no longer trade. We've done the story about the Siloc, the British bike company that's lost 25% of its business because of Brexit. And again, in here, In this article that they've got on the BBC, they've got an interview with a brewer, Clear Brew, I think it is, in Manchester, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah, Cloudwater Brew, based up in Manchester, brewery up in Manchester. And the owner says it very clearly. We've got all these shocks, plus Brexit has meant I can't trade and send my beer to Europe as easily as we could do. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he has lost a lot of money, because you may remember we covered the old dairy brewery, the big export Brexit champion that they were they were praised as. They lost over, what was it, £600,000 because of Brexit, because, well, European suppliers didn't want to take British brew anymore. So they're in a very same boat. And you've also got, as we said, the cost of living crisis. So you've got a lot of people cutting back on their spending. And if people aren't spending, that means that there's now less money going into these businesses. And you've got another person that they interviewed for this article, a person who started up a restaurant, I believe it was in 2018, got rave reviews right up until the pandemic. And now, after, pretty much because of the energy crisis, they can't continue. It's just too expensive for them to operate, because the price of energy is that high, they just cannot continue. And unfortunately, this is, I think, a warning of a sign of things to come. And I generally hope, I really do generally hope, hand on heart, we do not go into a recession. I really do. Because that would be bad. That would be incredibly bad for thousands of business, thousands of people up and down this country who would, again, lose their jobs. And we've also got a bizarre situation where a lot of people say, oh, don't worry, we're fine at the moment because we've got, practically full employment. That's not good either, because you've got thousands of positions out there who aren't going, fulfilled. And that means that businesses do not have the staff that they sometimes need in order to grow, because why? A lot of that staff used to come from Europe. And this is going to have another knock-on effect. So if we really do go into recession and you've got that going on, there could be suddenly a lot of unemployment. But yeah, the outlook for the British economy, unfortunately, is not very good. I think this has a lot to be blamed on, certainly, Liz Truss, because, the Conservatives were always sort of, playing with the economy, seeing what they could get away with. And then along comes Liz Truss, hand on the scales, and just goes poof. And we've been having problems with the economy majorly since then. Majorly since then. And I don't think those are going to stop anytime soon. Especially with the amount that, we've seen Jeremy Hunt have to borrow, not only to help cover the massive Brexit-related hole, and the fact that we've lost a load of trade revenue, and obviously companies can't export, which means there's less money from HMRC. All these kinds of shocks that we have seen since Brexit have just added one on top of the other. And here's the thing. Here's the shocking thing. We still, as a country, the UK has not recovered from the 2008 financial banking crisis. You've got parts of this country that have still not recovered from, the 80s, when Margaret Thatcher went and deindustrialized many parts of the north. There are a lot of problems here in the UK. And one of the things that certainly leaving the EU has actually done, it's certainly shown that the vast majority of problems in the UK were never caused by the EU. In fact, none of the UK's problems were caused by the EU. It was always caused by the British government. hopefully that's a lesson that sinks in. And it does seem to be doing so, at least to some extent. But we'll see. Unfortunately, bad times might be ahead. I hope, as I've said, I hope this does not happen. This does not come to pass, that we do not go into a recession. But when you're looking at a lot of the economists, what the experts are saying, yeah, none of this looks good. And especially today when we've got this warning that thousands of firms could face collapse, it's not a good outlook. But as always, like I say, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an invitation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. And as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.